For every Sherlock Holmes, there's a Dr. Watson, and for every Batman, there's a Robin. Wait, that didn't sound quite right. Okay, maybe take out Robin. Hey guys, what's up today? It's P. Gilbert, your blogger, writing consultant, and the author to the upcoming fantasy novella, The Sultan's Daughter. And today, we shall look at 9 tips on how to create the ultimate secondary character. But before we go any further with today's content, hit that subscribe button. Don't get me wrong, the main character is the fulcrum of your story, the engine that drives the narrative forwards. But more often than not, the main character has a sidekick, a non-point of view character that helps him with his objective. Secondary characters can make your story even more enjoyable. What's more, some of the finest actors of recent times have won Oscars for supporting roles, including Anne Hathaway in Les Mis, Christoph Waltz in Inglourious Basterds, and Melissa Leo, who won her Oscar in The Fighter pretty much for throwing plates at her husband. God, I wouldn't want to be married to that woman's character. But regardless, if you want to create a secondary character that might just steal the limelight from your main character, follow these 9 tips, and I hope they make the writing process a little bit easier for you as well. Tip 1. Decide how many secondary characters there will be in your story and what their roles will be. You can have 1, 2, or dozens of secondary characters, but as a general rule, the fewer secondary characters there are in your story, the better. This is because it makes the story tighter and it makes the writer's task easier, because every secondary character you create has to be 3-dimensional in personality, has to have ambitions of their own, has to be linked to the plot, and has to push the narrative forwards. But you may ask, how is every secondary character going to be linked to the plot and push the narrative forwards? This sounds like an almost impossible task. Well, it's not. Simply ask yourself, what is the secondary character's role going to be? How is he going to influence the main character, and in what ways? Take for example Brom from Eragon / The Inheritance Cycle, as played by Jeremy Irons in the film adaptation. He plays the mentor and influences Eragon by teaching him magic and setting him on his way to the Varden, the resistance against King Galbatorix. If Brom hadn't come into the story at the time when he did, the chances are Eragon would have been found by King Galbatorix's evil henchmen, taken, captured, tortured, and probably killed. So it's just as well Brom did come in and influence him as he does. For another example of the kind of roles that there are out there for secondary characters, take Christmas Jones as played by Denise Richards in the James Bond film The World Is Not Enough. Dr. Christmas Jones supposedly is a nuclear scientist, but who are we kidding? She plays the love interest and the damsel in distress. Her role in the film is to go underwater in a borderline see-through t-shirt and get herself captured into dangerous situations to ensure that James comes to save her. It is not the most original way of having a secondary character influence the main character, but it has been done before, and it probably will be done again. Our third example is Lord Henry Wotton from A Picture of Dorian Gray, who acts as a bad influence on the titular Dorian. He suggests Dorian do a deal with the devil so that Dorian will remain young while his portrait grows old, and at the same time he leads Dorian into a life of decadence and debauchery, whilst at the same time being happily married and living a conventional life like a good hypocrite. Tip 2. Decide the secondary character's goal and the reason for it. Like the main character, every secondary character has to have a goal and a reason for this goal. Otherwise, why else would they follow the main character? Assuming, of course, their role is to follow him. Let's look first at Samwise Gamgee, the unsung hero of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Sam's goal is to follow Frodo to Mount Doom and help him destroy the ring. And his motive? Well, he says it at the end of The Two Towers better than I ever could.
But there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo. And it's worth fighting for.
Our second example is Ava the Robot from Alex Garland's excellent low-budget sci-fi film Ex Machina. In this film, Ava, who is superbly played by Alicia Vikander, who if you ask me, should have won her Oscar for this role rather than for the Danish Girl. And in this film, her character Ava befriends Caleb. Her goal is that through him, he can help her escape. And her motive for this is that she fears being dismantled by her creator Nathan, played by Oscar Isaac. A brilliant book that I came across recently where every single secondary character has a goal and a motive is in Samantha Goodwin's Murder at Macbeth. This is a murder mystery, crime drama, whodunit, where every single one of the secondary characters, or suspects shall we say, has reason for having potentially killed the victim. I won't spoil it for you, I won't say who's done it, check it out. That's Murder at Macbeth by Samantha Goodwin, Murder at Macbeth by Samantha Goodwin. Check it out, and the interview that I did with Samantha earlier this year. Tip 3. Decide each secondary character's endpoint. Like with the main character, the sooner you decide each secondary character's endpoint, the better it will be and the easier it will be for you. Then you can give them the relevant character traits to make this ending come about in a logical and satisfying way. Take for example, Peter, Gale and Prim from the Hunger Games. Once Suzanne Collins decided that Prim would die, that Gale would be rejected, and that Peter would be the chosen one, at least in the sense that he would be chosen by Katniss to be married to her, then she could make these endings happen in an organic way. By the end of Mockingjay, Gale has become so war-weary he no longer cares for collateral damage and indiscriminately detonates bombs, causing Prim to be one of his casualties. Since Katniss cannot forgive him for this, she then chooses, by a process of elimination, to go for the other man who she loves, Peter, and marries him. Our second example is Captain John Smith from Disney's Pocahontas. The creators wanted John Smith to go back to England wounded, but as a hero, but at the same time not have him take too much of the limelight away from Pocahontas. So they had him take a bullet for Chief Powhatan, Pocahontas' father. How brave of him, how heroic of him, or mad of him. Tip 4. Decide the story arc for each secondary character. While not as ostensibly as important as the main characters, each secondary character must still have a story arc. They must develop as a result of the experiences they go through over the course of the story and be a different person at the end of the story to who they were at the start of it. Take for example Ron Weasley. At the start of the Harry Potter series, he just wants to win Quidditch matches for his house, Gryffindor, and be head boy to emulate his older brother. But over the course of the 7 books and 8 films, he develops romantic feelings for Hermione after spending much time with her and ends up the film married to her and having children with her. Our second example is Terence Fletcher, played by J.K. Simmons, from the film Whiplash. At the start of the movie, Terence is the chief conductor at Schaefer College, a fictional academy for elite musicians. But because of his treatment to his pupils, particularly the main character Andrew,
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1.
If you deliberately sabotage my band, I will you like a pig. Now, are you a rusher, or are you a dragger, or are you gonna be on my time?
Fletcher ends up losing his job, starting a band, and only then achieving what he has been looking for this whole time, the next Buddy Rich. Tip 5. Decide each secondary character's positive and negative traits. This is the start of what makes a character complex, as by nature, people are complex. Writers should aspire to give their secondary characters a mix of positive and negative traits, as we shall see from our examples. Our first example is Rudd Threetrees from Joe Abercrombie's The First Law trilogy. Rudd is a respected leader of a group of outlaws fighting against King Bethard. Rudd is a skilled fighter, an even better scouter, and he's quite funny in a crude kind of way. But he is also honourable and trustworthy of those around him, making him a borderline fool considering those around him are neither honourable nor trustworthy. Example 2 is Littlefinger from A Song of Ice and Fire. In the books, he comes across as charming, friendly, always willing to help, and incredibly politically savvy. Yet he is also a sociopath, a pathological liar, and is willing to sacrifice anyone for his insatiable ambitions. His personality traits have led him to accrue royal favour, to become the Lord of Harrenhal and the Lord Protector of the Eyrie by the end of the 5th instalment, A Dance with Dragons. It remains to be seen if Littlefinger's personality traits will result in the same demise for him at Sansa's orders as they did in the TV show Game of Thrones, although I pray not.
Sansa, I beg you. I loved your mother since the time I was a boy.
And yet you betrayed her.
I loved you. More than anyone.
Anything will be better than the wimpy child end that he got there. Besides, why didn't he just ask for a trial by combat? It's not like there weren't precedent for it.
I demand a trial by combat.
I demand a trial by combat.
By the way, if you are interested in reading a book with excellent secondary characters, check out N.M. Thorn's The Salamander Chronicles, and in particular, look out for Cal and Agent Andrews. Both are brilliant characters. Check out N.M. Thorn's The Salamander Chronicles, that is N.M. Thorn, The Salamander Chronicles. I have left a link in the description below to her books and to the interview that I did with N.M. Thorn last year. Tip 6. Decide each secondary character's flaw. In real life, people are flawed. It's what makes us three-dimensional. And the same must be true for each of your secondary characters. Only in your story, the secondary character's flaw must be linked to the plot. Let's look at Raven Mystique from X-Men First Class. In Matthew Vaughn's fantastic reboot of the X-Men franchise back in 2011, Raven Mystique is unable to come to terms with her blue form. She doesn't like the way her body looks. This causes her much distress, unhappiness, and insecurity throughout the course of the narrative. As a result, she ends up leaving Professor X, Charles Xavier, and joins Magneto, Eric Lenscher, because he gives her an outlet. Our second example is Barbara Hershey's Erica from Black Swan. In Darren Aronofsky's great psychological thriller, Erica cannot come to terms with her past failures as a ballerina. As a result, she pushes her daughter, Nina, played by Natalie Portman, incredibly hard, controls her, in order to achieve what she did not. This partly explains why Nina is a brilliant ballerina, but it also explains why Nina is emotionally immature, mentally unstable, and has a complete psychotic breakdown 3/4 of the way through the film. Tip 7. Give the secondary character an internal conflict. If you want to make your secondary characters really complex, the best way to do it is by giving them internal strife and linking this internal strife to the plot. That way, the audience will empathise with the secondary characters, even if they don't agree with their decisions. Possibly the best example in fantasy of a secondary character with an internal conflict is Boromir of Gondor. At Rivendell, Boromir vows to defend Frodo and help him reach Mount Doom so that he can destroy the ring. There is no question that Boromir means this, especially after all that Mordor has done to Gondor over the years. But Boromir also cares deeply for his father, whose rule is failing as the steward of Gondor, and for his people, who have suffered so much at Mordor's hands. Boromir knows that Gondor does not have the strength to withstand another impending onslaught from the orcs, and he sees the ring as his one chance to save everything that he holds dear. Thus, towards the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, Boromir, in a moment of madness and utterly seduced by the ring, tries to take it from Frodo.
Could have been mine. It should be mine. Give it to me. Give it to me. No. Give it to me.
This leads Frodo to abandon the Fellowship and for Boromir to do his utmost to save Merry and Pippin in vain from the Uruk-hai, resulting in his own death. Another secondary character who is internally conflicted is Ser Jorah Mormont from A Song of Ice and Fire. At the start of A Game of Thrones, Ser Jorah is a knight in exile longing to return home to Bear Island. He agrees to spy on Daenerys and Viserys Targaryen and poison Daenerys in exchange for a royal pardon. But as he spies on her, he falls in love with her, and then he can't make up his mind on the one hand if he wants to stay with her in exile or if he wants to return home to Bear Island. So he saves her and continues to spy on her. Eventually, at the end of A Storm of Swords, Daenerys learns of Ser Jorah's treachery and banishes him. But because Ser Jorah still loves her like a lovesick teen, on his way back to Westeros, he kidnaps Tyrion in the hope that this will somehow ameliorate her and that he will win back favour.
Risky scheme. One might even say desperate. You think Daenerys will execute me and pardon you? I'd say the reverse is just as likely.
It remains to be seen how Daenerys is going to respond to this in the next volume, The Winds of Winter, whenever this will come out. Tip 8. Decide the backstory for each secondary character. Secondary characters do not come out of a vacuum. They come from somewhere, and their past experiences influence them in a positive and negative way. Thus, their past, to have a bearing on the plot, must influence their decisions, i.e. how they impact the main character and what he decides to do. Take, for example, Neville Longbottom. At the start of the Harry Potter series, we learn that he was brought up by his formidable grandmother, Augusta, and not his parents, parents, and this partly explains why he's very timid and suffers from low self-esteem. And in the fourth volume, The Goblet of Fire, we find out that Neville's parents were tortured into insanity by the Dark Lord's allies and no longer recognise their own son. Neville's background is sad in so many respects, but it also explains why he is so determined to stop the Dark Lord and why he fights so heroically alongside Harry during the battle for Hogwarts in the 7th instalment, The Deathly Hallows. Our second example is one that I am greatly looking forward to finding more about in the next volume of the Kingkiller Chronicles, and that is Denna. Denna is quick-witted, intelligent, and very talented, yet she is also homeless, evasive, always on the lookout for a patron/sugar daddy, and disappears from time to time, causing Kvothe, the main character, heartbreak. What made her like this? Well, I hope that in the third volume, Doors of Stone, we find out more about how Denna became the person that she is and how she influences Kvothe. Tip 9. Decide the age, gender and status of each secondary character. The age, gender and status can give the audience an interesting perspective of the society from where the secondary character comes from or lives in, but nothing more. This is because the age, gender and status do not in and of themselves explain why the secondary character makes the decisions that he does. Let's look at Hermione Grainger, and come to think about it, there are a lot of Harry Potter references in this topic. Hermione gives us a fascinating insight into what it is like to be an 11-year-old girl from a non-wizarding family in Potterverse. But that is not what makes her worthy of note, other than when Draco Malfoy calls her mudblood, of course. Rather, what makes Hermione engaging and significant to the plot is her intelligence, her loyalty to Harry, her rigidity to the rules, and her ability to find solutions to seemingly impossible situations. None of this in and of themselves, though, have anything to do with her background. Our second example is Selina Kyle / Catwoman from The Dark Knight Rises. Her background as a cat thief is not what makes her appealing or what keeps viewers on their toes. Rather, what makes her engaging is that she is smart and skilled, can kick ass, and is utterly untrustworthy. Consequently, we never know if she's going to help Bruce Wayne / Batman, or if she's going to side with Bane. A really good book that I've come across recently with a secondary character with an interesting place in society is Blade from Nyna Queen's The Trueborn Heirs series. I recently had the privilege of interviewing Nyna Queen. Check out her book, that's the Trueborn Heirs series, and the first is By a Thread. Check them out, I've left links in the description below. And that's all I have for you today, guys. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have found this video on how to create the ultimate secondary character useful and interesting. Like, comment, and hit that subscribe button. Let me know what you think of my tips. Do you agree with them? What do you think I've missed out? Moreover, come the 2nd of July, my debut fantasy novella, The Sultan's Daughter, is going to be released, and then you can check to see whether or not I keep to my own writing tips. Otherwise, join me next time when we'll discuss how to create an awesome villain or antagonist. Until then, keep well. Once again, guys, I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching my video. I really appreciate it and I hope you've enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button and then you will be the first to receive more awesome content from my channel, and I hope to see you again soon.